Hey guys, Andrew Shrout here in the sideboard. I'm here with Chris VanMeter, the Season 2 points leader.
Yep.
And we're here to talk about your legacy deck.
Yes.
So you have shown up with Reanimator.
Yes, Reanimator. I've actually been talking for weeks now, and I think this deck is well positioned in the current legacy metagame.
Okay.
And I'm pretty happy to be playing in this tournament. I think it's very good.
Okay. So even more so than standard, I think this is a deck people generally, they already kind of know what it's about. But we'll go through it really briefly. Reanimate, Exhume, they get things out of the graveyard.
Yep, Reanimate, Exhume, Entomb. This is just the core of the deck.
Sure.
Lets you put a fatty in your graveyard and then put it into play. The really sweet thing is the interaction between Exhume and Entomb allows you to actually play around Deathrite Shaman. So if you have a creature in your graveyard, you cast Exhume, they eat it with your Deathrite Shaman, still with the Exhume on the stack, and then you can Entomb and put a creature in your graveyard and put it into play. So it gives you a lot of play even against common hit cards.
Gotcha. All right. And even right off the bat on the second slide, we see a little bit of spice.
Some new cards, yeah. So still we have 4 Gristle Daddy. He's just
card's good.
one of the best creatures.
Play about 7 if you could, right?
I mean, yeah, I would, to be honest. But then we have a Hapless Researcher and a Grave Titan. Okay. So I've never been happy with the 4th Ponder in the Reanimate decks.
Gotcha.
In fact, when I was playing Reanimator earlier in the year, had a top 8 with it. I only played 3 Ponders. So I've never really been happy with it. But I wanted to play a 8th creature in the main. It's the Grave Titan.
Okay.
And I wanted to play a 9th Reanimate spell. As we'll see later on, I have a 1-of Reanimate spell. And I wanted another card that will allow me to, dig for something, but also as another discard outlet.
Gotcha.
So Hapless Researcher just kind of fits the bill.
Okay.
Jesse Inman top-8'd the Legacy Open in Atlanta a few weeks back, had 2 of them in his deck and only 2 Ponders. And after talking with him a little bit, I wasn't too happy with playing a bunch of Hapless Researchers, but I think the one is very good.
Okay. And then sell me a little on Grave Titan. What role, when do you Entomb for Grave Titan?
When your opponent has Caracas. So you have Tightspout Tyrant is the card that you would normally get against a Caracas, but I don't think that card ends the game fast enough, and Grave Titan is going to end the game just much faster.
Okay. And is a little more resilient against things like Swords of Plowshares, I suppose?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then your remaining 1-ofs, these are pretty standard. These are the ones that all Reanimator decks play, I think.
Yeah, the big thing, though, is Iona and Elishnorn are actually the reason I think the deck is very well positioned.
Okay.
As the majority of the format can't beat either of those cards.
Gotcha.
So the majority of the combo decks can't beat Iona.
Okay.
As we saw at the Invitational, there are 3 people that top-8'd playing Storm. How do they beat this card? How do they beat this deck? Like, this deck is very well positioned against Storm, which makes me happy for this tournament. But it's also good against decks like Burn that are on the uprise.
Gotcha.
It's very good just basically against everything.
All right.
And Elish Norn is good against the Delver decks. So while something like Gristlebrand is going to beat Blue-Red Delver most of the time by itself, we saw earlier in the year that you can race it when Bob Huang won the first Open with his Blue-Red Delver deck, but Elish Norn actually just puts the nail in the coffin.
Gotcha. And then Tightspout Tyrant, just
it's just
a solution to any problem?
Yeah, it's a solution to any problem. Sometimes you can just get it into play early, play some Lotus Petals, bounce all their permanents, but it's also a fatty that's blue you can pitch to Force Will, which is important.
Gotcha. All right. Good cards, generally.
Yeah, a Brainstorm, Force Will. You're going to see those in every Legacy deck that has blue mana.
All right.
Careful Study, just a way to discard cards. Jerry wrote earlier, either this week or last week, that he feels like a Reanimator deck using Treasure Cruise and Thought Scours instead of Careful Study could be good.
Okay.
But I didn't have enough time to test it out, and
Gotcha.
I've always been happy with Careful Study, so I'm just going to stay on that route.
All right. Only 3 Ponder. You said you weren't happy with the 4th.
Yeah, never really happy with the 4th. We have 3 days. Most of the time the decks either play 4 days or 2 days, 2 Thoughtseizes.
Gotcha.
And I've decided to just play 3.
Okay.
So originally I had 4 days, but I cut one of them for a card we'll see on the next slide, as I wanted to play as a 1-of that just really impressed me in my testing. But then we have the 9th Reanimate spell here with Animate Dead, which is pretty sweet. Much like Reanimate, you can actually hit creatures in your opponent's graveyard, which is pretty cool. So sometimes you'll Thoughtseize or Force Will, Deathrite Shaman, and then steal it.
All right. And then some spice.
Yeah, so we've got the Lotus Petals, and then we have a Dig Through Time and a Pithing Needle. So I really was impressed with Dig Through Time as a 1-of when I was testing. There were a lot of games that... So there are a lot of decks that play Force Will, Spell Pierce Daze, and the early turns can get a little grindy.
Sure.
But if you're able to force interaction and then follow it up with a Dig Through Time on like turns 3, 4, or 5, you just pull yourself so far ahead, there's just really no coming back from it.
Okay.
So similar to how Treasure Cruise allows you to refill after you force interaction, this does the same thing, except we're looking for specific cards instead of just a critical mass of cards.
Sure. All right, and just a one of because it's a little too clunky in multiples, I suppose.
Yeah, just a one of. When I was preparing for the Invitational in Seattle, ultimately I ended up not playing this deck, but I had a second one in the sideboard.
Yep.
I decided not to do that for this tournament, but I think that might be right in the future.
Okay. And then one Pithing Needle in the main. I know you have more on the board. This is what brings you to kind of free board
primarily
release?
Caracas hate.
Okay.
Since their cards decks like Death and Taxes would play a lot of Caracas, but then there are also a couple Miracles players from this tournament. Joe Lossett and Reed Duke are definitely going to be on Miracles.
Okay.
I could see some other people, and I know Jeff Hooglin is going to be on Death and Taxes.
Okay.
So having the Pithing Needle is very good, since it's good against both of those decks.
Okay.
But you also get to hit things like Divining Top against Miracles. If you do that game one,
Sure.
it's really tough for them to win.
Okay. All right. We'll talk about the sideboard next. We'll kind of go through the lands briefly. We do see a Bayou and Tropical Island, which suggests there might be some green shenanigans in the board. Before we get to the sideboard, talk to me a little about the expected metagame here.
So going through all the 16 different players that are going to be in the tournament, I felt like that there was going to be quite a few different flavors of Delver.
Okay.
Which I think that this deck is good against. Also, there's going to be a couple Reanimator players. I imagine there's going to be some combo players, Storm. I think Jim Davis will probably run back Storm again.
Okay.
And then you also have like Tom Ross, obviously, after thinking he's going to be on Infect.
Sure.
Brad has either been going back and forth between like Show and Tell decks and Deathblade decks.
Okay.
Which I like this better against Show and Tell than Deathblade, but I think it's still fine in either case. And I just feel like looking at all the different decks, a blue-based combo deck that has access to Abrupt Decay in the sideboard, I felt like was going to be very good as a way to attack the Delver decks and the Miracle decks, and then the chaff that would be in between, and this just fit the bill.
All right, fair enough. So spoilers, these green lands are for Abrupt Decay.
Yes, for the Abrupt Decays.
Right.
So very good at hitting cards like Containment Priest, hitting Grapdigger's Cage, Rest in Peace, ways that they're going to interact with you, which is really important because as you notice in the main deck, there's only 14 lands and no Show and Tells. So I don't have Show and Tell in the deck. Before, you'd play 16 with 2 City of Traders in your sideboard to board up to 4 Show and Tells against the Rest in Peace decks. But I think that people are just leaning on like 1 or 2 Grapdigger's Cages now instead of a bunch of other hate. So I'd rather just have a flexible card in Abrupt Decay and not worry about the graveyard hate.
Okay. Sphinx the Steel Wind and Inkwell Leviathan, these are your kind of sideboard one-ofs to Entomb for.
Yeah, so Inkwell Leviathan is very good against the Crocus decks or against decks that might have some spot removal against us. It's just you can get it into play and it's just very good. Basically, you want it against anything with Jace.
Okay.
Sphinx of the Steel Wind is very good against the Delver decks, in particular Blue-Red and Temur Delver. So Gristlebrand's tough for them to beat, obviously, but this is just like a 5th Gristlebrand. We get it in play. It has lifelink just like Gristlebrand, but it also has Vigilance, pro-red, pro-green, so they can just never get rid of it and never beat it.
Okay. And then 4 Thoughtseize in the board. Now, I know a lot of Reanimator decks play some Thoughtseize in the main.
Yeah. I like having the Thoughtseize in the board just as, like, a lot of times post-board you just want to be more proactive instead of reactive.
Okay.
On top of that, people are going to play around days, especially post-board.
Okay.
Sometimes not so much pre-board, but definitely post-board when they see it game 1, they're going to play around days.
Sure.
So this lets us swap dazes for more proactive discard spells.
Gotcha.
And it's also very good against some of the hit cards.
Okay.
So you might not be able to daze a Grapdigger's Cage, but sometimes you can snag it out of their hand.
Okay. 2 Massacre, I know Containment Priest is a card on the rise.
Yeah, Containment Priest. It's also very good against the Meddling Mage decks, which is something you have to worry about. It's good against Death and Taxes.
All right.
And we have a Flusterstorm. As again, I felt there would be at least 1, if not 2 Storm decks.
Sure.
But it's also good against Sneak and Show.
Okay. And then rounding out the sideboard, those extra Pithing Needles we talked about, and the one of Duress.
Yep, just a 5th discard spell that you can bring in against the other combo decks and the control decks, particularly something like Miracles you want to be able to use this for.
All right. Well, it sounds like you have your ducks in order there.
Yes, I am all ready.
Good
ready
luck
to battle.
tomorrow.
Thank you.
Stick around. We've got plenty more coverage coming of the Players' Championship here in Roanoke.